Welcome, everyone, to the May Walk Massachusetts Network meeting. I'm going to turn it over to our speaker today, Seth Stromwasser from the Boston MPO.
Hello, everyone. Give me just a second to get my screen shared. We'll get going. All right. Everybody seeing the slideshow? Yes, beautiful. I actually need to rearrange my windows real quick. I can see that. All right. I think we're good to go. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Thanks, Brendan, for having me. Yeah, so today I'm here to talk about heat, which I'm sure is on everybody's mind as it is. Maybe not Sherry in Alaska. I don't know how the weather is up there. But certainly good timing for this presentation. I'm going to be talking about some of the work that the Boston Region MPO has been doing to understand and address the challenges that extreme heat is posing for people walking, biking, and rolling and using transit throughout the Boston region. Whoops, I'm on the wrong. There we go. So just a little overview of what I'm talking about. I'll start by introducing our organization, the Boston Region MPO, and our project that we're talking about here. I'll walk through the development of a data set that we've been working on to measure extreme heat on our street network. I'm going to talk about the development of pilot interventions to mitigate heat, again, for people walking, biking, and rolling. Um, and then go over some next steps for our project and what we're looking to work on in the future. So the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, for those that don't know, also known as the MPO, is a regional public agency, covers the 97 cities and towns in and around Boston. We not only study transportation issues, but we also provide millions of dollars in federal funding for transportation projects. That happens through our Transportation Improvement Program. And so in the summer of 2024, we launched this project called Neutralizing Onerous Heat Effects on Active Transportation, also known as No Heat. I can't take credit for the acronym, but it's always fun to read it. And we approached the project in two phases. So in the first phase, we developed high-resolution microclimate data to show what the temperature actually feels like for people walking and rolling and biking on our streets on hot summer days. In the second phase, we use this data in collaboration with our local partners to plan, design, and pilot strategies to reduce heat exposure. And like I said, this cross-sector collaboration is a key element of the work. We partnered with Georgia Tech. Our partner municipalities are Chelsea, Everett, Revere, and Framingham. And then we have community-based organizations like Walk Massachusetts, Mass Bike, Bike to the Sea, and the Mystic River Watershed Association. And we got a grant from the state's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which is through the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And we're really, yeah, really grateful that we've had this opportunity. So to set the stage a little bit, less important today because I think we're already thinking about heat, but we've all experienced moving around outside on a hot summer day. The comfort that we feel when we're walking or biking or rolling around is affected a lot by the infrastructure that's around us. So this is an unshaded overpass in Boston. There's really no shelter from the sun. It's right over the pike. It's really loud. It's just a big slab of pavement. Um, and that feels a lot different than this nice tree-lined street right around the corner. And so our No Heat project is aiming to quantify the difference in how the temperature feels on streets like these versus the ugly overpass, and then to pilot heat mitigation measures in places where we know that there are a lot of people walking, biking, and rolling. So the project is building off of research that looks at how heat can change the quote perceived distance for people walking or using other modes of active transportation. So two trips of the same length can feel shorter if shade and amenities are available, or longer if the infrastructure is less inviting. So in this graphic, you can see that the sidewalks are the same length, but the one on the top is nice and wide. There are benches to rest on, trees to cast shade, some stores you can stop in. And then the one on the bottom, it's in bad shape. It's all cracked up. There's lots of cars going by. It's narrow. So this distance is going to feel longer for somebody who's walking. And so to quantify how heat is experienced by people walking, biking, and rolling, we turned to the Universal Thermal Climate Index, or UTCI. And so this is a model that takes into account the way that the human body experiences heat. So it uses data like air temperature, humidity, wind speed, and then radiant temperature, which is sort of the heat that is emitted by surfaces around you. And these are merged together with assumptions about how people's metabolism and clothing affect how they process heat. And this gives us a perceived temperature that is the UTCI. And this UTCI value can be translated into categories of heat stress. And this shows where heat becomes harmful to human health. So, according to the model, temperatures as low as 78 degrees can be a threat to human health. And we know this is especially true for vulnerable groups like young children or older adults. And so some of the advantages of UTCI over other data sources, not only does it better represent the human experience of heat than other types of data, it also can be calculated at a very high resolution. So surface temperature, for instance, is a commonly used metric for heat. And it comes in typically at 30-meter resolution, and it's got a temporal resolution of more than 2 weeks. So you're not getting new information until every 2 weeks. And so if you remember the pictures of those streets that I showed earlier on, those very different streets could end up having the same value for land surface temperature, just because the resolution is so coarse. And then these data also come from satellites, which have a top-down view of the landscape. These measurements include things like rooftops and highways and other roadways, places where humans might not actually be traveling. And so this can give us like an inaccurate conclusion about where the hottest areas are for people who are walking, biking, and rolling. On the bottom, you can see an example of the UTCI data that we've been developing, and it's at a 1 meter resolution, so much more fine-grained. And we can even see the difference in heat stress between two sides of the same street. Our data can also be produced on an hourly basis. So not only do we get more information beyond once every 2 weeks, but we can also focus on the hottest parts of the day, and think about how heat stress changes throughout the day, which we know is a big factor. So here's a look at what the UTCI data that we produced for the Boston region looks like. It's produced as a raster data set, which is essentially a grid that covers the whole area, and it's got a value in degrees for every 1 square meter cell. This example shows the UTCI at 1 p.m. on the hottest day in 2023, which was July 27th, I believe, centered on downtown Boston here. And so this illustrates that we have data for every location across the whole region. You'll notice that buildings are excluded, and this is just because the way the model works, it's not really applicable to rooftops. And then obviously inside buildings is a different story. So we then overlaid this data with the road network for the region, which we wanted to do to get at where are these corridors that we want to focus on. And so we calculated the mean UTCI, the average UTCI along each road segment. And as you can see here, there is heat stress on most of the network on a very hot day. And you can see a few spots where there are tall buildings or lots of trees, the heat stress is lower. It's a little hard to see on this map, but you can see like the financial district where there's lots of tall buildings, very shady. It's also breezy next to the water. You can see a bit in Back Bay where there are nice tree-lined streets. Things get a little cooler. So, like I said, we wanted to go beyond just looking at the hottest locations. We also incorporated data that gives us an idea about where people are walking and biking. So we combined our UTCI data with walking and biking volumes on the same network of roadways, including paths, multi-use paths, and we used that to calculate an index of heat risk that tells us where there is both high heat stress and also high numbers of people walking and biking. So when we're looking at the UTCI data, you get all these like really hot locations where it's like, a big freight terminal or, the airport comes up really hot. But we know there's not people out walking around there. So that's not where we want to focus. This walking and biking data lets us add some nuance to that and really think about where our interventions could be most effective. And so, in collaboration with our partner municipalities and our community groups, we organized a short list of 20 key corridors to look at more closely. And this, our initial list was based on the data, is the top, I think, 5% hottest segments within each municipality. And we did a little bit of, editorializing about what makes sense as a corridor. You can imagine there's sort of like disjointed fragments that show up. Um, but these are sort of what we looked at as kind of concentrated hotspots that would make sense to look at from a planning perspective. And so to further narrow down these corridors, we involved the whole project team. So we had planners from our partner municipalities and folks from our community-based organizations. And we all sort of got together and folks shared their expertise on the cities that they work in and where they live and their knowledge of, community priorities, what people who live there really care about. Um, and additionally, municipal staff provided good context about future planning efforts. So we talked a lot in Everett, I think, about they're working on a new plan for their main street and sort of how heat interventions could fit into that. So I'm going to pause there to wrap up the sort of data portion. And this is just a reminder of the topics that we covered. If anybody has any questions about what I've talked about so far.
Um,
Ralph, did you want to go ahead?
I noticed like in the middle of the map was Boston Common, and in one view it was a nice color, and the other view, I guess it was broken up because you were only looking at the paths. Um, yeah, so it was actually hard to pick out where Boston Common was on the second picture. uh,
Yeah,
so that's an interesting thing to see. Um, so that just jumped out at me, and then of course, you've filtered out the water.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think, it's interesting when you go from the raster data set to the links. Um, a lot of places might have a lot of trees, but the places where people are actually walking, like the paths on the common, are not all shaded. And so, like, those ones out on the west side where there's hardly any trees, that's a hot place to be. But that's a good observation.
On a very hot day, I'm looking to see what the shortest path between shaded areas is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Anna?
Yeah, I guess I was just curious. I'm sorry if you said this, but how easy is it to get access to this data, or was it, something you could just download, or just curious about that?
Yes, I actually forgot to include the links to that here, although they are on our website, which I'll talk about at the end. But the data is a little bit difficult to work with just because it's very large and dense. So it's not for the faint of heart, but it is all available for download. And we have, if you go to our website, which I'll show you at the end, um, there's a short survey you fill out and you'll get an email with a list of all the links. And I should say too, part of our goal with this project and, presenting to different groups is to advertise that, we have this data and we want people to use it, but we're also willing and eager to work with folks on projects that they want to look at. So, the walking and biking data is actually proprietary, so we're not allowed to share that. But we're happy to work with folks who maybe want to do a project with that, and figure out a way we can help you look at that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
I just dropped a link to the project page in the chat as well, which has the dashboards and stuff and the ability to download that there. Seth, I just wanted to highlight something that you mentioned, but that I really thought was an awesome part of this project, where you looked at the data and you were like, we think these are the areas based on heat and based on, mobility data like counts and estimated counts of people walking and biking where there are high concentrations of people. But then, there was a discussion like, which of these spots, rise to the top where we should focus our efforts now. So I just want to, those conversations were really interesting, like being able to hear from, you know, if we do it in this area, we'd be able to include these other community partners who would be, excellent to be able to share their perspectives. And like you said, future projects coming down the line where this information coming out of it could really impact what design is chosen. So I just want to highlight, I think that has been an awesome part of this project.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think we've all been really happy with how that's played out, and yeah, I mean, I'm a data analyst, so I'm typically not involved in that kind of outreach and collaborative work, but I'm really glad that we've been able to do that. I mean, I probably would not have looked at this and said, yeah, this is how we should decide, Um, but yeah, no, it's so important to go beyond just the like, yeah, we were talking about this yesterday actually about like, you know, people parachuting in and saying like, we have the data, we know
Right.
best.
Right. Yeah.
And
No, I
that's
think you guys made room for that, which, yeah, it's sometimes tough if you're like, well, the data say these things. Like, so, but the fact that you said, hey, here are a number of places that could be good to focus on, instead of just being like, this is the worst spot. Let's attack that right now. So,
yeah, yeah,
um, also selfishly, I was so glad that Framingham was part of it. So like I was able to like talk about, oh, there are these city councilors or these state reps that should also be invited because they have made this a priority in the way they talk about transportation in the city. So, and then, we have Johnny on staff who lives in Chelsea, so he was able to, bring some of his lived experience as well, which we at Walk Massachusetts, we think lived experience is an important thing to bring to all things. So yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Any other comments or questions about the data stuff before we move on? Alrighty. So yeah, now I'm going to move into sort of talking about our interventions, and some of the outreach work we've been doing. Um, so we narrowed down those 20 locations with, like Brendan was saying, with in collaboration with our partner municipalities and other groups, to 6 corridors for walk audits, which were led by Walk Massachusetts, and 6 corridors for bike audits, which were led by Bike to the Sea in Everett and by Mass Bike in our other municipalities. And so during these audits, we were also able to ground truth some of this data using heat sensors. So you can see that in this GIF here, which I think is really striking. You can see the difference in temperature and the sun versus the shade. And I think it's cool because you can also see some of the nuance that gets incorporated into this model in terms of the land cover. So you can see when it starts out on the dark pavement on the road, it's very hot. You move to the lighter cement, which is still in the sun. You can notice there is a difference in the temperature there. And then the shade obviously is much cooler. So I just think that's a good illustration of like this model is incorporating what type of land surfaces are around, shade certainly, but also wind and all of these other factors that I think give it a good level of nuance. Um, and then we moved into our mitigation development. So these audits provided a lot of valuable input, and this informed site selections for our pilots. We ended up selecting the Northern Strand Trail in Everett, which is shown here, the intersection of Carter Street and Everett Avenue in Chelsea, right at a bus stop, which is just, I think, a block away from the commuter rail station, and then DeSalvo Park in Revere, which is also right next to a middle school. And the audits also helped us decide on pilot structures. We were talking about, all sorts of different things you can build. There's like shade sails and, vines growing on trellises and all sorts of different approaches to this. But we had some great conversations about this at the audits, about what would work well, what people would actually use. And when in the during those audits, one of the things that kept coming up were like a lack of places to rest, to like sit down, insufficient seating, and then shade as well, particularly at transit stops. We saw a lot of people sitting on like random objects by the side of the road, or shading themselves with their book or whatever. So based on this need, we opted for shaded seating structures. And so on the right here, these are the shaded benches, which we put two in at our site on the Northern Strand Trail. And then we also have some other types of structures. Here's an example of one of those shaded benches along the Northern Strand Trail. And then we have this other shaded bench. That's just a slightly different design. But this one has solar panels on the roof, and which generate power that can be used to charge your phone or other devices. And so it's got a wireless charging pad and then a little 12-volt plug, which, I went out there and tested myself, and it was pretty cool to just, they've got batteries in there, and you can charge your phone while you're waiting for the bus. What was I going to say? Yeah, this is the spot in Chelsea. It's right at the a bus stop for the MBTA Route 112, and again, like a block from the commuter rail station there. And then we have a similar structure. This is like a picnic table with the same solar covering in DeSalvo Park in Revere. And then right behind it, you can see is Susan B. Anthony Middle School. One thing that's cool about this one too is it has a little cutout there for a wheelchair user to be able to pull up to it. And yeah, you can see here, I mean, this was like a few hours after it was installed. There was already folks sitting down using it. I was there when the guys were working on installing it, and the school let out. And there was like 100 middle schoolers running around, and they were all very interested. And I was telling them like, yeah, it's for you guys to use. It's a place to sit in the shade, and you can charge your phone. And they all lost their minds at that. They were like, what? So that was cool to see. It's definitely, definitely something people were looking for. Um, and then I'll also just mention we've been working with DCR to get trees planted at these pilot locations. And so we have two in the ground. Actually, that might be three at the site in Everett, and then one near our bench in Chelsea. And this is, I think, another good example of the partnerships we've been able to leverage in this project. DCR has their, I think it's called Greening the Gateway Cities. And I think they were happy to have us, build that connection that let them, identify a spot they could plant some trees, where I think they'll be very useful once they grow up a little bit. And then another part of this project that I wanted to highlight is this cool routing application. And so this can demonstrate basically, in a concrete way, how different paths have different levels of heat stress. So as you can see in this example, there's a route that's only a few steps longer here, than the shortest path, and it's both cooler and has more greenery along the way. I mean, I'll note that it's 0.5% cooler when the UTCI is 103 degrees. That's maybe not a huge difference, but it's sort of a proof of concept of you can imagine there's two parallel streets and one of them is nice and shady and one of them is not. This could illustrate like, you can choose this route instead of maybe the more direct one, and sort of lower your heat exposure. Um, and yeah, I think, this is meant as a communication tool. I don't think it's going to end up in the App Store unless Google decides they want to take it up. Um, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't make much sense to actually use this to decide where you're going. But again, it's a great communication tool, and like I said, it can demonstrate, I think, in a concrete way, how people's route selection is really affected by the conditions along these corridors. Like this is something people do all the time is they pull up their phone and figure out how to get somewhere. I think it's a good way to demonstrate that, what you're looking at is time when you're deciding your route, but what if you thought about how much heat you're going to be exposed to along the way? Happy to talk more about that. I think we're still working on this, and I think we're working on how we can put out more demonstrations of it. Um, yeah, and so just some notes on, I think, the successes of this project. Like, Brendan mentioned earlier, we expanded our capabilities a lot through our partnerships with Georgia Tech, an academic institution that provided a lot of technical support. Our partner municipalities, and then community-based organizations, of course, like WalkMass. And then rapidly getting these things built. After we developed the DCI data, we were able to, go through that process to identify our priority corridors, get our walk and bike audits done, and then procure and install the interventions in less than a year. It really all came together in like the last few weeks. All of a sudden, they were all on the ground. The structures themselves were all installed over the course of one day. I mean, I think they're like, they take like 6 hours or something to put together. And like Brendan mentioned too, we've got a lot of really positive feedback on this project. I think particularly municipalities have been so pleased to have us come in with the funding ready to go and the planning tools ready to go, and that really lets them do the work that they're best at and that they want to do, which is knowing their communities and prioritizing where they're gonna put their limited resources. And then lastly, the work was data informed at every step. But like we talked about earlier, did not entirely rely on data sets. We talked to people on the ground, and leveraged people's expertise to come to consensus on which interventions were best, at which locations. And again, this has been supported by what we've heard from folks on the street. We showed that picture earlier of that woman and her daughter using the bench just a few hours after it was installed. And my colleague Carmen was there and chatted with them, and they said the bench was sitting there wrapped up for a few weeks before it got installed, and they said they were eagerly awaiting it getting put in. They're very excited to be able to have some shade to sit in, and then the charging was a nice bonus. And then, so moving on to next steps, we're hoping to continue this work in three key areas: evaluation, engagement, and then expansion. So as part of the current grant project, we are developing some processes to evaluate sort of the impact of these pilot mitigations. And we're doing that using sort of three tools. Looking at changes in bike and pedestrian activity. And I'll mention here that we have talked about this a little with WalkMass through, I think, other projects, but we've got these bike and pedestrian counters now, that we've been installing around the region. And so we've installed those counters at each of these pilot locations. And we're hoping we can looking at the data and see, is this increasing the number of people walking and biking here? I don't know that it's going to make a huge impact to have one bench along a busy corridor, but I think developing that methodology of how and what do we measure to determine if the work that we're doing is making a difference on the ground. Um, the other thing is modeling the change in UTCI from these improvements. And again, this, the one small picnic bench is probably not going to show up in a big way, but the folks at Georgia Tech are working on, some scenarios like if we were to plant if we had 10 full-size trees on this corridor, how would the UTCI data look different? And we can use that again as a communication tool, and sort of a scenario planning thing of like, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, what impact could we have? Um, and then qualitative surveys. We've been we put together a survey to ask folks their thoughts on these interventions and how it will affect the way they get around and their day to day. And then these engagement activities. We were actually out yesterday at Northern Strand Trail in the heat, talking to folks going by. And that was really great. Again, there was a school dismissal right around 2:30, and there was a swarm of kids who came in. Luckily, we had lots of popsicles on hand, and they all filled out our survey and talked to us. So that was really cool. And we're planning a more formal focus group with students at the middle school near our Revere site, with it's called Eco Youth, part of Green Roots. And then lastly, I'll include more information about this at the end, but we've got a couple of data-focused webinars coming up. So there's going to be one on May 28th and one on June 9th. And again, we'll send out the details so you can take a look at those. The first one's going to be focused on sort of the data that we've already produced and different use cases for it. And then we've also, as part of this project, developed tools for other people to sort of repeat this analysis and create data sets in their own areas. So we're hoping people in other parts of Massachusetts, I know other MPOs and regional planning agencies are interested, and then across the country too. So that's what the second webinar will be focused on. And then, we hope to expand the work more, both geographically, involving more municipalities, and then also on the data front, incorporating more relevant data sets, and then developing sort of a proof of concept decision support tool, so we can sort of quickly assess the impact of heat mitigation strategies. So, like I was saying, with modeling UTCI changes, and looking at some of the sensor data on the ground, before and after. And I thought I had another slide, but that's it. So yeah, this is I think Brendan already put this link to our project page. And down near the bottom, there's links to register for those webinars I mentioned. And then links to our web map, which we are working on a new version of that web map, that should be released pretty soon. We will also have down the road a story map, that's got more of a narrative of the project, and we'll have some interesting interactive maps where you can look at spots around the region that we want to highlight. That's all I got. I think we got some time for questions and discussion, if anybody has any.
Great. Ralph, you had a question in the chat that I was trying to get clarification on, so maybe you can clarify now. You said, can a user control the relationship between the seating feature and the shading feature? And I was wondering, do you mean, can you adjust the shade angle? Is that what you were asking? You're muted. You're muted. I assume that you're asking, can you adjust the shade structure itself?
Yeah, that you had something that looked like where the roof was and where the seat was had a fixed relationship, and since the sun moves during the day, the optimal place to be sitting uh, moves around the shade, the, the shading feature. And in the winter, you might want a wind shelter feature that keeps you from freezing and a lot of sun.
Yeah, that is a good point. I don't think that the shade structures are adjustable. That would be a cool feature. But yeah, to your point about the winter, we have thought about, what would it look like to model this data in the winter? Because that, I mean, that's a big challenge in the Northeast is like walking and biking when it's freezing out. And yeah, what does mitigation look like in that scenario?
Yeah, f just following up on that thought, Ralph, like another thing on some of the walk audits we talked about, we're like, okay, well, are there locations where there is already like a bus shelter, but could it be expanded with shade sails during the summer or something like that to like, accommodate more people or create more shade? So those were some of the conversations that were had, and including geez, who owns that pole there? Like, would we even be able to attach to that? And the answers were not always, oh, it's just the utility company, because in Everett actually put all the utilities underground the last time they redid the main street. And so all the poles were actually owned by the municipality. So, there might be other opportunities if a place owns their poles versus them being utility poles. So, lot of interesting thoughts.
Yeah, Anna.
Yeah, I was thinking that, a lot of municipalities, as the weather is getting hotter, might be thinking about grants for this type of infrastructure. Is that something you guys have been thinking about when it comes to this, like having, um, yeah, like a grant program or something like that, where municipalities can request different types of shade structures or things like that? Just curious.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that's a little above my pay grade. I mean, we've talked about how we can incorporate this into the tip I talked about earlier, the transportation improvement program of like, because that is a place where municipalities can come and propose a project and receive funding. So we've thought about, how do we incorporate this heat information into those decisions? But there are lots of other programs like this. I mean, MVP itself is a great place to go. And yeah, we've talked about sort of curating sort of a list of grants people can look at. I'll plug to our so we have a technical assistance program, and we are eager to have municipalities come to us with their ideas and help them execute them, which we have some funding for that, and we have the ability to help find other funding sources.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I think there was a good attention to like how can we make the most of this stuff by like partnering with DCR. Three of the partner communities were gateway cities, so they were able to take advantage of tree planting, free trees planted from the Green in the Gateway Cities program.
Yeah, no, that's great. I guess I'm kind of thinking from sometimes we do bike and pedestrian plans
Yeah.
and people are saying we want benches in this part of town or we want yada yada. And it's helpful if we can come back to them and be like, okay, well, here are some programs you can use to get those amenities. So, um, yeah, that's great. Helpful.
Yeah, I guess following up on that, Seth, like maybe it would be useful. It might already be on the website. I haven't checked it lately, but are the details of like the benches that you guys selected and the shade structures that you selected available there so people can not have to almost do the digging themselves? You guys already, weighed different options and made choices for a reason.
Yeah, I don't think that information is up there yet. We have so like the grant that we're working on. has specific deliverables, and we've sort of been focused on getting those out the door. But we have dreams of sort of other products that people can use. I mean, I mentioned the story map. That will be sort of a narrative of the project. And then I think, some sort of like report type thing, hopefully not a big PDF, but something that, yeah, gets into that detail of like what were the decisions we made um, and then yeah, like I think I mentioned at the end, this sort of decision support toolkit um, of yeah those sorts of questions of like here's our situation, we've got this size piece of land and these constraints, what can we do to get something in the ground relatively easily. But yeah, I think we are thinking too about other ways we can continue this work in the future, so there will certainly be more happening. And Jen Concanon, who is our manager of multimodal planning, has been leading a lot of that stuff. She's been out on maternity leave. So I think once she comes back, we'll hopefully get going with some of that other outreach and technical support stuff.
Yeah, this is really cool. So I think there's a lot of awesome things that can be done with this work. Really exciting.
And I know the answer, but I will ask the question anyway. Why Georgia Tech? It seems very
Um,
random.
yes, that is a good question. We had actually the previous manager of multimodal planning at the MPO, who sort of wrote a large part of this grant proposal, and came up with a lot of this project. He initiated it, and soon after the project began, he got a tenure track professor position at Georgia Tech, which he accepted, understandably, and so we were really lucky that we didn't just lose him; we were able to turn that into a collaboration.
Yeah, I think that was great. And he's also a Walk Massachusetts board member. So we were sad to see him move to Georgia, but we were really excited to be able to continue engaging with him on this effort. So
Yeah, and his research group or his lab they've been doing all sorts of other stuff with heat. So I'm excited to see what they put out.
are there other questions? I guess minor questions, but like in the data set, like what were the like kind of typical hottest days? So they were usually late July is what the the maps are kind of using as like hottest day 1 p.m.
Yeah, so 2023 was a weird year actually to be doing this because it was very hot on average, but there actually weren't very many like extremely hot days.
Hmm.
So I think so the hottest day was in the end of July. It was July 27th, and I think the temperature was like 95 or something, which is plenty hot, but not
Right.
as extreme as it gets. But then we sort of looked at the average heat index across the whole summer and just chose a day that had a close heat index to that. And so that was in late August. But it is interesting. I mean, doing this in a different year, we could have ended up with different days, and like the sun angle, is pretty different between June and August, which plays into the UTCI data. But so that's just what it ended up being for 2023. And the reason we chose 2023 is because that's when we had our walking and biking data available.
Gotcha. Um, very cool. Um, okay. Are there any other questions that folks have? If not, thank you so much, Seth. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate you taking the time to share this with everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Great. Okay, everyone, have a great rest of your Wednesday and hope to see you next month.
Stay cool. Yeah.